We'll roll with it. So I'm Donna Marie Todd. I've been a teaching artist in California, in Tennessee, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Virginia. I travel to storytell, and I have a particular passion, also being a writer, for helping children discover their own creative processes. In other words, the ways that their minds light up when they begin to learn about creativity is, for me, extremely exciting. So I want to just kind of start the workshop by looking at our children, I guess, our students, through the eyes of how they're being entertained and taught in ways besides our work. So if I were reading them something, either from a book or, a story from a book, I would be doing this. In this fun, fast-paced workshop today, you're going to learn how to engage students' imaginations. Are you paying attention, Billy? With storytelling and how to access their deepest creative thinking. It's on page 9, Tim. Through employment of neuroscience-based practices and sensory memory. Is everybody still on page 9? So real quickly, what did you notice about that experience that is different than what your students are experiencing on a daily basis?
You're interrupted all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to keep your mind going while being interrupted. Mm-hmm. It's very familiar.
Right? Think about it from the child's point of view, the student's point of view, which is how I'm going to move into one of the things that they have been doing since they were like this high, in utero even. They were watching TV.
Like you were particularly interested in actually what our experience was.
Say that again?
It didn't seem like you were particularly interested in what our experience was.
No. And when I made eye contact with you, I was doing it for the purpose of what?
To rein me in, to pull me back to your mission.
Right. To discipline you, correct you, pull you back in. Yeah. Our kids have grown up watching television. And on television, people are always making eye contact with them. And that's something that we don't do enough of in our schools. So when we storytell, one of the big things that we're bringing to the table is this sense of engagement, this sense of eye contact, this way of uniting with the students that we're actually teaching. Does that make sense? So if we are thinking about this impact of television and the fact that it has been years and years and years since they were anywhere where people who they were listening to weren't making eye contact with them in a fairly dramatic way, that really has had a huge impact on how they perceive being read to. Then the second thing is how cell phones, which any age child now seems to have access to, how those small handheld devices have really impacted their attention. I was fascinated last year before COVID hit when I was in a residency and I was in a middle school dining hall. And I was fascinated that the kids, that was the only time they were supposed to use their phones, right? And they all have their phones out and they're sitting at tables, but they're not talking to each other. Even if they were talking to each other, they were talking on their phone to each other about this person or that person, selfie. So this myopic, really small focus that so many kids have on just that little device and on the fact that 130 words or 130 characters is now a paragraph has really changed how we perceive language, right? And it's compressing and dumbing down how we perceive language. Ooh, somebody got a present.
You're muted.
You're muted. Oh.
Right. It is so beautiful, and I'm terrified that I'm going to do something bad to kill it. Okay, please go ahead.
Oh, no, not at all. So when kids have this history of seeing highly dramatized things face to face on television. And then when they have a secondary history of small handheld devices where they're pulled right into a small screen and where 130 characters becomes a paragraph, then we have this compressed aspect of how they think about language, right? So one of the things that storytelling does when you use it in the classroom is it enables you to make really intense eye contact with the students and to engage their sensory memory. So for instance, if I were to start telling you, if I were going to read the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, and I said, once upon a time, there was a boy named Jack who lived in a cabin with his mom way back in the middle of a dark holler. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Jack who lived with his mother way back in a tiny shack in a dark holler. One really draws you in. The other one separates you because, again, there's no eye contact. And because you're reading, you're multitasking. You don't have the ability, even if you have a very expressive voice, and I'm sure all of you do. I know some of you do. If you're not making eye contact and really creating that moment with the kids where they're able to start seeing who you're seeing in your mind, then they're going to have trouble visioning that character. Great writing begins with being able to see what it is that you want to communicate. So great writing is not about pushing words around on a piece of paper. It's about seeing something in your mind that then you share with your reader or with your listener. So there was some very interesting research done a few years ago now it began with a neuroscientist at the University of California at Berkeley named Yuri Hassan. And he was actually looking at ways to increase Alzheimer's patients' awareness of language. When he stumbled upon something very interesting, he brought in a storyteller and he had the storyteller hooked up to all these, fMRI gear things and magnetic pieces. And he hooked all of the listeners up and ran them through fMRIs too while they listened to the stories. And what he discovered was that there was a coupling that took place between the storyteller's mind and the listener's mind, particularly anytime sensory memory entered the picture. So anything that created something that you could smell or see or taste or touch, all of a sudden, the same regions of the brain in the listeners lighted up that were lit up in the storyteller's mind. And there was actually a neural coupling that took place between the two to where they were timed exactly, they were firing in exactly the same ways. And he thought, oh, that's interesting. And then that project began to expand and they actually brain mapped a lot of listeners and storytellers because they were so astonished by that result. So one of the things that you're engaging when you use storytelling is that interlocutory coupling, he calls it, or that neural connection between you as the storyteller or as the presenter in the case of your classroom and the students as the listeners. So there's a famous storyteller named Donald Davis who has a saying that if you haven't seen it, you can't tell me about it. And that's kind of a hallmark of the way that I like to teach creative writing is that I don't really care whether or not they can, how many, large words they know, how many letters are in each of the words. I care about whether or not I can see what they're thinking about. And even more, I care whether or not they've actually seen anything before they start writing about it. So we're going to play around today with ways of helping students actually see characters, see settings, and see sequence maps in their minds so that when they go to write about it, there's a level of confidence. One of the beautiful things about using storytelling to teach creative writing is that it also enables you to cover all aspects of your student population. So your students who are less versed in the language arts, who maybe aren't creative in that way, or maybe they have learning disabilities toward language, are able to see things in their own mind, experience it, and have that creative process in much the same way that your gifted students might. So it's a way of leveling the playing field for kids in the classroom. And often when I lead residencies in schools, it's the learning disabled kids or the kids that have been labeled as slow learners in a separate classroom who are actually able to really pull off some pretty amazing storytelling because they have really embodied that experience of seeing the character and the setting. So Any questions about the neuroscience first before we move on? It's pretty
I
cool.
love it. It's amazing.
It is amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. My son that's interviewing at Morehouse this weekend is a neuroscientist. So his undergrad degree is in cell molecular bio, but also in neuroscience. And the more he teaches me about neuroscience, the more books he turns me on to, the more I'm just amazed at the creative power of our brains, and especially our ability to see entire worlds within our minds. Do any of you have any experience with students who play games, who are video gamers? Um, Anybody have kids who do virtual reality with gaming? Yeah. um, when they enter those worlds, I used to really dismiss the video gaming until he and another friend of his let me actually see some of these games. The world building in those games is unbelievable. And they're using all sorts of small rewards along the way to kind of increase the kids' engagement with those games. But the world building and the character building in those is really phenomenal. So I would encourage you to let them tell you a little bit about maybe some games that they're playing if you're thinking of doing a creative writing piece. And then as soon as they finish telling you about it, say, but I don't want you to use any characters from that particular game. But thanks for telling me about that. Because very often I'll see characters from games come out in workshops. And the kids are just kind of recreating what they've already seen. They're not really seeing something new. And we want them to see something new, obviously. So the neuroscience says that the more sensory language information we put into a story, the more that listener begins to see the story in their own minds. So you're literally engaging their minds on a neurological level and connecting, coupling with them. So in order to do that, remember the importance of pauses. Remember that the listener is always a few minutes behind where you are in a story. So if you're describing a character, or a setting. For instance, if I were to say, Jack's house, it was so sad. It had a huge hole in the roof. Well, if it was raining outside, you would be lucky to be sleeping outside instead of in Jack's house in the middle of a puddle in the middle of the floor. That's how bad Jack's house was. And then if you put a pause in there and you let people see the hole in the roof, the puddle on the floor, then you move on. Then they're engaged neurologically with your story. Because what happened when the rain came down? They experienced the rain on their skin, right? Puddle in the floor, sleeping in the puddle on the floor. Again, you've got the aspect of seeing the water on the floor. You also have feeling engaged there, the touch aspect of sleeping in the puddle. So all of those things, you want to make sure that you give just enough time with the pause for the listener to see that part of the story. So I'd like to tell just a little bit of Jack and the Beanstalk, and just enough to introduce pretty much all of the characters in the story. I think we all know the story, and so you don't really need to go through the whole thing, but I want to introduce the characters, because if I were doing this in your classroom, I might start with this story. If it were older kids, like some of your children at Christ School, I would definitely take a more sophisticated story, but I think you'll get the idea. So listen particularly for the characters and how they come into the story. So once upon a time, there was this boy named Jack. Now, Jack and his mama, they lived way back in this old dark parlor inside this little tiny shack. Oh, it was the saddest looking thing. Well, there was a hole in the roof, and when the rain came, you might as well be sleeping outside as sleeping in Jack's shack, because the rain would come right through that roof and land in a puddle on the floor. Can you imagine sleeping in a puddle on the floor? Well, now Jack and his mama, they were poor. They were so poor. They didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. Jack's mama, she hadn't had a new dress in years, and Jack had long since outgrown his pants. There was this much of his legs sticking out of his pants. The only thing they had in this whole world was one sorry old dried up milk cow. And don't you know that the day came when that cow could no longer give any milk at all? It was a sad day. Jack's mama said to Jack, Jack, the cow can't give us no more milk. You need to take her on into town and sell her. Get whatever you can for her. Jack, he loved that old cow. I mean, sure, she was all sorry brown looking and her bones were sticking out of her back, but he loved that cow. He took her by the halter and he was walking on into town to sell her, just like his mom had said, when all of a sudden out of the woods popped this little old man. Hello there, Jack. That's a mighty fine cow you got there. What are you doing with her? Well, Jack said, if it's any of your business, I'm taking her into town to sell her. Oh, are you now, Jack? You taking her into town to sell her, are you? How much do you want for her? Well, that was a real good question. Jack hadn't thought about that. He said, well, I reckon she's worth a lot. Well, what would you give me for her? Oh, said the little old man, for a cow like that, well, I'd give you 2 magic beans. Now, Jack wasn't any fool. He said, 2 magic beans for a cow like that? No, sir. Oh, little old man, well, in that case, seeing that you're a smart boy and it's a fine cow and all, I'll give you 3 magic beans. Well, now, Jack wasn't no fool, was he? He knew 3 magic beans was a good price for that old cow with her bones sticking out. So he handed that old man the halter and he took them 3 magic beans and he went scampering home to his mama. Come in the front door and he said, Mama, look at here what I got. Look what I got for the cow. It's 3 magic beans. Do you think his mama was happy about that? No, sir, she was not. She said, Jack, you sold the cow for 3 useless beans? We're going to starve to death, boy. And then she took those beans and she threw them out the window. And she sent Jack off to bed without his supper because there wasn't anything in the house to eat anyway. Well, overnight, it started raining. And you know how it was in Jack's house with the hole in the roof like that? Why, the rain just came right on through and made a big old puddle on the floor. And well, Jack, he got real tired of sleeping in all that water. So he just got up earlier than usual and went downstairs and looked out the window. Oh, me. Growing outside the window was the biggest stalk he'd ever seen. Why, thing went right up through the clouds, it did. Well, Jack, he knew he probably ought to not do anything about it, but he was so curious, he just decided he'd climb it. So he climbed it like he'd climb a ladder. Hand over hand, foot over foot, he climbed up that beanstalk, popped his head out, looked all around outside of that cloud. Oh, it was amazing. There was a whole nother world up there. On one side over there was a beautiful lake and all these deer prancing around the lake and eating in the grass. And then on the other side, well, there's the biggest house, biggest castle Jack'd ever seen. It had turrets on it and flags flying. And Jack, he sure wasn't awful hungry. He figured like a big old house like that ought to have something good to eat in it. So Jack, he just decided he's going to go knock on the door. So he walked up to the door and he knocked on it. And the door was open by what Jack could only say was one of the most beautiful women he'd ever seen before in his whole life. And she said, well now, hello there, Jack. What's a sweet little boy like you doing up here above the clouds? Well, I'm real hungry, Jack said. If you could just give me a little something to eat, maybe a biscuit or some ham or something, I sure would appreciate it, ma'am. Little biscuit, little something to eat. Well, why don't you just come on in the house here and let's see what we got. Come on, Jack. So Jack, he walked on into that house. He could hear his feet thumping on the floor because the floors were made out of real marble. And hanging from the walls were all these big paintings of dead people. And there was a big chandelier over top of this huge table that had all kinds of food on it, more food than Jack had ever seen. And that woman, she put a biscuit and a big old slice of ham on a plate, and she pushed it over there to Jack, and she said, well, now, Jack, here's you some food, son. You go on and eat up, though, because my husband, the Troll King, he doesn't much like little boys. In fact, he might take a real liking to you, just decide to eat you. He eats little boys, Jack said. Just about that time, don't you know there was the biggest footsteps you've ever heard in your life thundering into the front of that house? Why, there was footsteps like you ain't never heard, like an elephant was coming in. Boom, boom, boom. Jack, he looked at that woman and she smiled a wicked smile at him, and he hopped underneath the tablecloth of that table, hid himself under that tablecloth that went all the way down to the floor, which was a good thing, because in come probably the ugliest man any of you could ever imagine seeing. He had snaggled teeth, and there was foam and green drool coming out of his mouth, and he was huge. He was the size of a tree with hands the size of hams, and he leaned over to that woman and he said, fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of a man. Where is the woman? Oh, she's there. There's nothing in the house but this ham I've just made for you. Why don't you sit down and have a bite? Well, he sat down and he began to eat. And then he asked that woman to bring him his hen. And she went and she fetched this ordinary looking little chicken. And she put it down there in front of that Troll King. And he said, lay me an egg. And that poor little hen, laid him a golden egg. And then that king man, he started drinking a great big glass of mead. Mead's English for beer. And he got really drunk and he fell asleep right there on that table, and he started snoring. As soon as Jack heard him snoring, he crawled out from underneath that tablecloth. He grabbed that golden egg, stuck it in his pocket, started to turn and run off when that little chicken said, what about me? So Jack grabbed that little chicken, stuck her under his arm, and he ran out, climbed back down that beanpole, run into the house and said to his mama, look here, mama, what I got. I got a chicken that lays golden eggs. And Jack's mama said, Lord me, Jack, where'd you get that? And when she looked outside and seen that big old beanpole, she said, you didn't go up there, did you, Jack? It turned out, of course, he had. So now I want you to think about the characters in the story. We got quite a few. Let's see, first we got Jack, right?
Sorry.
We got Jack's mama. Who else we got?
The man that gave him the beans.
Yep, the magic man that gave him the beans. Yep.
The sexy troll wife.
The sexy troll wife. Sexy girl. Gotta have a sexy troll wife in any story.
And the troll.
troll and the chicken.
The troll and the chicken. So we got 6 characters to play around with. So here's what I'd like for you to do. This is an exercise that I have a lot of fun doing with kids. I want you to pick a character, and we're just going to visualize the character. I'm going to guide you through a visualization of the character, and we'll just see what you can see. But it'd be really fun, since there are just a few of us, if you could identify, pick a character, and then we could share all the characters. That would be a lot of fun. So I'm going to let you go first. Emily, who would you like to do?
I would like to do the chicken.
Oh, awesome. So Emily's got the chicken. Sorry, Kathy, I know you probably really wanted that, but.
I wanted the chicken.
Did you want, I'm happy to do something
Oh,
different.
I'm teasing.
So you pick, you get to go.
Yeah. I would like the wife. I mean, not the wife, Jack's mother. I would
Jack's
like
mother.
Jack's mother.
Okay, all right. Sherry Love.
Okay. I will play with the troll.
Ooh. Now, if we were in a classroom, I would really reward Sherry for having picked a person of opposite sexual identity, because that really expands out the creative mind a little bit. So I would have said, awesome for you to explore doing someone who's of a different sex than you are. So I know, girl.
I think she's the teacher's pet now.
She's so now what I'd like for you to do is just very gently close your eyes and just put down any pencil, pen, anything you might have. And if you can, place both your feet flat on the floor. That is also very helpful. And with your eyes closed, I just want you to start to take in a deep breath. Become aware of your breath as it's coming in your body and leaving your body. In order to go someplace in our imagination, we have to leave where we are, the space that we're in. So in order to reassure your mind that you're completely safe during this exercise, I invite you to press your left foot into the floor and hold it for just a second. And release it, and then press your right foot into the floor and release it. Now become aware of where your legs are meeting the seat that you are sitting in. And as you feel your legs growing heavy, being held very securely by this seat, I invite you to place your fingers of one hand on your belly. Place it just above your navel and just below your rib cage. And begin breathing intentionally into this space. Feel your breath pushing your hand away from your body. And then on the exhale, feel your hand falling back against your spine. When you breathe intentionally into this space, you are relaxing the nerve center of the vagus nerve, which is command central for your emotional system. Runs alongside your spinal column and up into your brain. It's where the term gut reaction comes from. So take 2 very deep intentional breaths into that space, and taking in the first one, hold this breath. And now blow this breath out through your lips like you're blowing up a balloon. And again, keeping your eyes closed, breathe deeply into that space. Hold that breath. Keep holding. And now release the breath through your mouth like you're blowing up a balloon. With your eyes still closed, feeling gently relaxed. Take another deep breath into that space. Let this be the deepest breath you've taken all day. And hold that breath. And release this breath very, very slowly through your mouth. So slowly that if a ribbon were hung in front of your face, it would not move. Now, with your eyes still closed, see yourself standing on a vast plain. Nothing but sand and blue sky as far as you can see. And you notice coming toward you, still at a great distance, is a character. This is your character, the one that you've selected. And as you watch, you see this character coming closer and closer to you. And you're intrigued by the way they walk, because you see we can learn a lot about someone by how they walk. Does your character have a strong, sturdy walk? Or are they wounded or weakened in some way? Do they walk with a limp, crouched over? Or do they stand upright, shoulders thrown back, chest thrust forward with pride? It's your character. You see it in your own mind's eye. Now, your character is now about 5 or 6 feet away from you, and they stop. And as they stand there, you begin to look at them lovingly, deeply, because you want to know so much about them. You look at what they're wearing. If it's an animal, you look at the way the feathers are laid out, what coloration is in the feathers, whether the wings are clipped or not. If your character is a person, then look at the fabric of their clothing. Look at how they're dressed. Is the fabric old and worn? Or is it of the latest fashion? Perhaps leather and velvet. It's your character. You decide. Now, as your character pauses there, you begin to walk around them. Again, trying to see as many details about their appearance as you possibly can. Taking in the texture, the color, and the shape of their clothing or their feathers. And when you come to the front of your character, you stop. And you look at them as closely as you possibly can, honing in on one particular detail that just fascinates you. Maybe it's a ribbon in their hair, maybe it's a scar. It's your character, you decide. And now again, watch your character turn. Your character is turning all the way around in front of you. And now placing your hands again on your belly, just above your navel, just below your rib cage, taking a deep breath and hold this breath. And allow the image of your character to burn itself into your mind so that you will remember every detail you have seen, the colors, the shape. And as you exhale, your character very slowly walks back into the horizon, away from you. And you open your eyes. And now, without saying anything to anyone, I invite you to take your pen and paper to either draw, if you have some colored pens or pencils, the character that you saw, or to write about the character that you saw. And then we'll come back in a few minutes and we will share. So write down as many details about your character as you can remember. Start recording again here, and I'd love to hear about some of the characters that you just saw. So Emily, dying to hear about the chicken.
I apologize. I've got it written all around the edges of my notes here. So. Chick is a small red chicken with a loose wobbly crest that sways to and fro when she walks toward me. Her feet have thick yellow claws, good for scratching if she ever had the chance to wander free in a dooryard, but her eyes say she's never done this. Her eyes are black, and they flick left and right, up and down, as if she's always ready to flee from something. Her wings are chicken wings, yes, and look at her from the front, and she is, and they are just that. She is just that, a small chicken with wings, but but her left wing tells a different story, where the right wing is a smooth spray of brown and red, an array of multicolored feathers in even layers from thick to thin. The left is a fan of bones. Something or someone has pecked or pulled or ripped every feather from that wing, so it rests against her side, a fan of nothing but bare bones.
Ooh.
Oh, bless her heart.
If you write a book, I want to buy it.
I know.
Love it. Wow. So what do we like about what Emily saw? Let's look at the detail that she's that the visualizing gave her.
Yeah, that wing, that is so vivid and clear, and that's the kind of image that stays with you.
Yeah.
And her colors, the colors of everything else was beautiful. I saw them.
Mm-hmm.
The eyes, that was really important too.
Yeah. The whole clicking back and forth, that feature alone it just embodies such nervousness and conditioned panic. I love it. Love what you did with that. It's just amazing. Thank you for sharing the character. I feel so bad for her.
I'm glad Jack took her.
When you were describing it to me, when you were asking me to see her come, it was really interesting because I was having a hard time seeing her coming.
Yeah.
And then when she turned to the side, I really saw that wing and wondered, who would do that to a chicken?
Right.
Oh, so I'm curious to know. I guess that must be Sherry, that must be your character.
I will tell you, it is in fact. I don't know if it'll show up, but I did a little drawing of my troll character.
Yeah.
There he is.
So I envision my troll as being like a giant toddler.
Mm.
Kind of innocent and also dumb and no self-control. And so I can so see this big giant toddler. Oh, this is my chicken. Ooh, wing, wing, wing,
Yes.
a
There's
feather,
so-
like that kind of thing. That's how I was picturing him. Physically, I imagine him as like, this kind of weird big head with little tiny ears, big head, little ears, and a great big nose, big bulbous nose. He didn't have any clothes on except for like a kind of cliche, but like a little apron skirt thing, you know what I mean? Like the little triangles. And arms longer than normal, big hands, big feet. And he just was kind of goofy, like a big toddler, just like no awareness.
Very cool.
I'm wondering how he got that sexy wife.
Good question. You're-
So what did we like about Sherry's character? What really resonated with us about that?
The toddler,
Mm,
the toddler was really good.
mhm.
Yeah. I love the incongruity of that. Having a big toddler is a terrifying thought to me.
Me too.
Oh,
You
and
can
how
see why
they wouldn't be aware of their body. They'd be in a room. They'd be just, like perpetually drunk. It'd be terrifying.
Right. Isn't that fascinating? And then the
And-
tiny ears got me. I worked with a student not too long ago who was quite large, but they had just little tiny ear, and I couldn't stop thinking about that. Like I'd never seen that before. So that to me was a fascinating descriptive piece. I want to just say that I would encourage you when you're working with students in the classroom and you're asking them to do visualizations of characters, and we're going to do a setting in a minute, to have colored pens and pencils out on the table. Even seeing color engages your neuroplasticity in your mind and engages your creative senses. Just seeing different colors, knowing that they're available. Often, especially Emily, with older grades, there's a real reluctance to pick up the colored pens, except on the part of the really creative kids, and the mathematical kids always just want to have, the mechanical pencil, and write out what they think they've seen. But I would encourage you very much, especially in a way of leveling that playing field between kids who have very high linguistic gifts and kids who do not, to really encourage that visual representation and to say, the markers and the pens are there so that you can draw this character out. The important thing is not the words you use, it's whether or not you see the character. And so if it's easier for you to represent the character through a drawing, please do it that way. And then as you're working with the kids in the classroom, when you see, I usually walk around, I actually play some very beta wave music while kids are doing this exercise. And I kind of very quietly walk around the classroom, and I specifically look to see kids who are writing really long narratives. Like, so Emily, I would have identified you like right off the bat. And then Sherry, I would have noticed that you had the drawing, and I would have referenced both of those as this is a great way to find a character and to really see them in your mind. And so is this. Listen to this. So I would show them one and let that student explain the drawing, and then I would lean toward the highly linguistic person who's written this very long paragraph. I would put the person with the drawing first, because we tend to make comparisons in classrooms based on kids' ability to write long pieces of material. And that lets the child that is seeing it in a more visual way take that on. The other interesting thing is, then if you move into allowing your students to actually tell their stories, which I would encourage you to do, because that really develops skills of presentation that they're going to use their entire lives. And the kids who have begun with the drawings, it's kind of like, they say that kids who haven't learned how to crawl have difficulties later on neurologically, which is interesting. The kids who draw the characters frequently are able to embody those characters when they do the story in ways that kids who have written about them cannot. The kids who have written tend to go back into, their narrative languaging, and they pay attention to their words. The kids who have drawn pay attention to who the character is, which is a really interesting way of drawing contrast too. You need both as a writer, obviously. But it's just a way of letting them see those skill sets that other kids have and have developed, and then the other side of that skill. So you're kind of plugging your students' skills in and letting them teach one another, if you go that next route and let them actually tell their stories to each other. So Kathy, that brings us to you and Ma.
I saw an old lady with, I call it old lady hair, that I fight all the time. It's frizzy, it's kind of wild and frizzy and gray frizzy hair. I could immediately see that she'd lived a full but very hard life. I could see it in her face. And even though her face looked like a hard life, she had a bright smile. She had bright eyes. They were twinkling eyes. no glasses. I immediately liked her. She was a bit small and round. She was one of those ladies with rounded shoulders that her head sort of sunk in between her shoulders. You could tell there was lots of hard physical work in her past. She had on a faded green dress with tiny white flowers that were all faded. It was an old-fashioned dress that buttoned up, shirt waist, kind of like Aunt Bee would wear on Andy. Her hands were wrinkled from hard work and harsh water. Her stockings, she had on stockings, but they were rolled down in a roll down to her ankles. And she had on very old-fashioned, worn-out shoes. I saw her as clear as day.
Nice.
I saw this lady. Yeah.
So what do we like about the mama?
The eyes again. It's always the eyes. You know,
Right.
the fact that she has these twinkly eyes and a smile says that in spite of a hard life, she's still alive. You know, like she's a very alive character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that detail of her head sitting right on her shoulders is,
Yeah.
she's little and she's almost like worn down by the work that she's done.
Yeah. And look how beautifully all the characters would play into one another. So if we were to put this onto a stage, so this is another way that you could use this creative writing piece in your classroom. You could actually assign characters to a story like this and then let the kids recreate the story. And then present the story with each of them doing their character. So you can either assign everybody a character and have them work in teams when it comes to writing the narrative, doing the sequencing of the story, or you can have each child develop a story based on their character and telling it obviously from that character's point of view. So there's a lot of different ways you can teach those language skills just with one story like this. And in fact, it's fun to take a story that they think they really know, like Jack and the Beanstalk, and just twist it all around, just put them in a blender with it. It's just so much fun to see them get confused. Like, they thought they knew what was going to happen, but no, because you're the wicked smart teacher. So, so I invite you to just put your pens and pencils down again, and we're just going to visualize your character one more time. We're just going to spend just another minute with this, and we're going to look for relational identity and emotional identity. So again, I invite you to just put your hands or a hand lightly on that area of your tummy, just above your navel and just below your rib cage. And taking a deep breath, and hold this breath, and then release it like you're blowing up a balloon. And again, taking a deep breath. Hold that breath. Let your eyes just sink gently back into your head. Let them find darkness, a moment of rest. It's been a long day. And very gently exhale. Taking another deep breath into that vagus nerve space. Remember, you're relaxing your nervous system so that you can leave the classroom and enter your imagination. And then let this breath out very, very slowly through your mouth. And as you do, you are again standing on a vast plain. Coming toward you is your character, just as they did before. And as they come toward you, you take in their walking again. Look for any energetic detail you might have missed the first time. Do they seem to have a lot of energy? Are they young? Are they wounded in some way? Does the gait that they use reveal any kind of sorrow, pain? Now your character stops. They're 4 to 5 feet in front of you again. And this time I want you to look for a detail that you had not yet seen. Maybe it's a missing button on her shirt dress. Maybe it's a scar across his shoulder. Maybe it's a oddly shaped feather or claw. You decide. It's your character. And now beginning at your character's head, I want you to take in their face and then allow your eyes to sink down all the way to their feet. And as you look at their feet, you decide whether they're clean, dirty, bruised. Are they wearing shoes? You look to their feet to see what they might have done that day. And now allow your eyes to gently rise back up across your character's torso, again, landing on their face. And now I invite you to make eye contact with your character. They want you to see who they are. And you look deep into their eyes. In fact, you lose yourself in their eyes. And you look for the energy that is present there. Are they happy? Are they happy to be in this story? How do they feel about the other people in the story? What is their relationship? They trust someone else in the story. It's important to life itself that we have someone that we can trust. Who does your character trust in this story? And how do they feel about being in the story? And now I invite you to, again, feel your hand rising away from your body as you take in a deep breath into that space of your vagus nerve. Hold that breath. And as you release your breath very gently through your mouth, your character turns and walks away, so happy that you have taken the time to learn who they really are. And when you're finished with that breath, you may open your eyes and without saying anything to anyone, just make a couple of notes to yourself about how your character feels about being in the story and who they trust. So obviously these emotional pieces can go very deep. Um, but let's just real quickly look at this piece of our character. I wish we had more time to play around with this, but we have other things to get to. So Emily, tell us about your little hen. You're muted. No worries.
Um, she she is one of those characters who has this extraordinary ability, and she's just so tired of it, and she just wants to be free to just be a chicken, to lay some regular eggs maybe, and have little chick, what do they call little chicks? And so she trusts Kathy. She trusts your mama when she finally makes it down the beanstalk. I'm anticipating that that's what's going to happen. She's going to make it back down to Jack. She doesn't really trust him because he's kind of wild and crazy and a little frantic. But when she finally gets back to that house and she sees the mama, she says, "Ah, oh, there's she knows how to take care of me." And someday I'm gonna be able to scratch around the yard and meet a rooster and fix my wing. And I'm so happy for her.
At least put a ribbon on it, right? So it doesn't,
Right, dress it up a little bit, put some salve on it, maybe. I
right.
don't know.
Do a mama thing. Oh, that's so sweet. That's
At her little head.
her little head. And so, Kathy, since the chicken landed with you, let's talk about your mom and how she feels and who she trusts.
She has brown eyes,
Mm.
and they twinkle because she loves her son so much. But also in that twinkling, there's a little bit of aggravation because she's trying to trust him, but he has done this thing that she's not sure she should have done. I mean, if you take the chicken out of it, they're pretty much in trouble.
Right.
So she's worried about that.
Mhm.
Trusting, but trying to trust, but she's worried about it.
And who does she trust, Jack?
She's trying. She's trying hard to trust him.
Trying hard.
But he has traded their only cat, the only thing they've got left, for 3 beans.
Yeah. And Sherry.
So my giant toddler troll, he trusts his wife, but she's kind of like a mother figure, you know. In my experience with this troll, is like it's his wife, but you know, she takes care of him, and so he trusts that she'll have his food and do all that sort of thing. I noticed the thing I noticed about him this time is freckles. He's got freckles on his face, and his eyes are brown like Jack's mama. But you know, they're sort of like half closed, you know, because he's always sort of like almost like that Twilight thing, you know, like he's in La La Land a bit, and he just feels like everything is his. So he's happy that he owns the story. He owns the sky, the chicken, you know, like it's all his playground.
Mhm. Very nice. So I love it that each of the characters has real motivation for why they trust the person that they do. I think that's really awesome. Good job visualizing that. And I was going to finish out by doing a sequence map, but I think I would rather show you how I teach kids to envision the setting. Since we've spent some time visualizing character, I think I'd like to do the setting and then just tell you how I would use a setting map to help them turn that into a sequence map, if that would be okay. Would that be all right with everybody? Okay. Because this is a fun little activity in terms of how to teach seeing a setting. And it's a fairly unique way of doing it. So I'd like to share that with you while we have the chance. And just because you're embracing the whole visualization piece so well. Again, when I do this in the classroom, I do have some sort of music that calms the beta wave on very softly in the background. So I apologize that all I have today is a squalling cat for y'all to
It's okay.
listen to. Okay, so I invite you again. We're gonna stay in this story. Okay, we're just gonna stay with the Jack and the Beanstalk story, and I invite you again to very gently close your eyes, put down any writing implement, and to place those fingers on that area of your tummy, just above your navel, just below your rib cage. And this is, again, the home of the vagus nerve. You're relaxing your central nervous system by doing this. The deep breathing, the 3 breaths, are releasing tension around your heart, just so you'll know the science behind what you're doing. So if you take in a deep breath, this time pull the energy intentionally up around your heart. Hold it for just a moment. And then release the breath through your mouth like you're blowing up a balloon. And again, pull the breath up into the area around your heart. Hold the breath. Blow it out through your mouth like you're blowing up a balloon. And now as you take in a deep, slow breath into that area just above your navel, just below your rib cage, I invite you to see a tarmac. And on this flight tarmac is a hovercraft. Now you can, in the classroom, allow your students to pick any type of hovercraft that they would like. So I encourage you to see that. Is it a helicopter? Is it a motorcycle? What kind of hovercraft do you want? This hovercraft is going to take you up into outer space. So you need to make sure that it's something that encloses you in some way. Could be a space capsule. But now that you see your hovercraft, you're going to walk over toward it. And you're going to enter your hovercraft. When you sit down in your flight chair, you notice how comfortable and secure it is. It almost squeezes your body a little bit. It holds you so firmly. And you know you're going on a journey, so you take the safety harness that's on your right side and you grab onto the latch and you pull that safety harness all the way across your body and latch it. And then there's another safety harness on your left. And so you grab the latch of that and you pull the safety harness across your body and latch it on your right. Now you're safely secured and you look at the control panel for your hovercraft. There's an on switch. You flick that to the on position and all the lights on your hovercraft's control panel light up. And you notice with a smile that all of them are green, which means go. Everything would appear to be in working order. Now in the center of your control panel, there's a joystick with arrows going up and down and to the left and to the right. This is how you control your hovercraft. So with your eyes still closed, put your hand around that joystick and very gently push the joystick away from your body. And you'll feel the hovercraft begin to rise just a few feet off the ground. You're testing the equipment. And then you pull that joystick back toward yourself to lower the hovercraft back down to the ground. It was a very gentle landing. It's a really nice craft. You try it again. This time you hold the lever forward just a moment longer and the hovercraft rises about 8 to 10 feet in the air and stands there. And now you decide to try the movement from left to right. So you tilt the joystick to the left and you see your hovercraft very smoothly glide over to the left. And then you bring it back to center. And then you take the handle of the joystick and you let it go over to the right. Very smooth operation. You bring it back to the center. And then you bring your hovercraft back down to the earth, pulling the lever toward you. You again check in with the control panel. Everything is green, everything looks go. So you're going to go into outer space now with your hovercraft. So pushing the joystick forward, you begin to lift off from the earth. You're rising higher and higher and higher. You're going up through the thin clouds, all the way up into the deep midnight blue of outer space. It's amazing up there what you can see. Star systems, planets. And suddenly there's a huge explosion off to the right and you see all kinds of bright light and you can feel the heat from that explosion so intensely that you know you need to move away. So you direct your hovercraft over to the left, away from that new star just now being born. And as you direct your craft that way, you notice that there is a solar system to your left. Doesn't look like much. You're passing this amazing Milky Way. All kinds of beautiful colors, nebula. And you're floating in that deep midnight blue of outer space, taking in the small solar system rotating around a fairly ordinary looking sun. And you're drawn to this small planet. You decide to go down toward it to see more about that. So you direct your hovercraft down toward this small planet. And you go closer and closer until you enter the outer atmosphere of this planet. And as you lower your hovercraft through the clouds, you see this amazing world. There's a lake over to one side with deer running around it. And you direct your hovercraft over to that lake to take in the appearance of the deer. They're not exactly like any deer you've seen before. And the color of the lake is an odd shade of blue. But then you can't help but notice that to the right is this enormous castle. It has turrets, flags waving from the turrets. And you pull your hovercraft over to the side of this castle to see how it's constructed. What is it made of? As you pull your hovercraft up against the outside of this amazing castle, you can't help but look in one of the windows. And when you look in the window, you see the opulence with which these people are living. Whoever lives there has surely brought in a lot of spoils of war. And you glide alongside this castle, again, taking in how it's made, when you notice that in the center of this world is this stalk. Strangest thing. It's coming right up through the clouds that this entire world is sitting on. So you decide to explore that. You bring your hovercraft alongside this stalk and you pull your control stick back toward you and you begin to lower your hovercraft down through the clouds, down toward the earth beneath. And that's when you see it, this little shack of a house. You direct your hovercraft over toward it. In the yard outside is an incredibly scrawny cow. Poor thing. And then you take in the house itself. What a mess. You glide alongside the house in your hovercraft and you look at how it's made. It's certainly nothing like the castle above. Feeling sorry for whoever lives in such a pitiful house, you decide you've seen enough. And so you lift your hovercraft back up through the clouds, up into that second world, gliding alongside that beanstalk. And you can see the lake and the deer, and you can see the castle. And you again take in their position with one another. And then you direct your hovercraft up toward the stratosphere again. You go up through the thin clouds, up into the deep midnight blue of outer space. You can see that newly blazing sun in the distance, and you know that your tarmac is near that. So you guide your hovercraft back toward that star. And sure enough, as you get close to the star, you can see the tarmac beneath you. So you lower your hovercraft back down into the middle of the X. And it meets the ground with a gentle thud. You're home. You flip off the power switch and all the lights go dark. You unbuckle the safety harness from its lock on the right, and then you undo the safety harness from its lock on the left, You're home. And in your mind, you see everything about the world that you have visited. And you take in a deep, low breath. And you hold this breath. And as you let your breath out through your mouth very, very slowly, you open the door of your hovercraft and you walk back out into your life, opening your eyes. So if I were leading this exercise in a classroom, I would have the students now write out or draw out, preferably draw out what they saw when they were in the hovercraft. So you would have the above world with the Troll King's castle and the lake, and then you would have the below world coming down alongside that beanstalk, and you would have Jack's house. Then you would direct the student to do their deepest exploration of what they saw around where they actually would live, right? So Emily, you would be inside the castle, and Kathy, you would be in Jack's house, and Troll King, obviously you would be inside your castle too. Although you might, if he likes to play outdoors, you might describe, where he likes to play outdoors and build that in. And then as you allow the students to develop their own version of the sequence of the story, with the plot of the story, how Jack goes up, what he takes. I always encourage them to change those items up a little bit, how all that happens. Then when they go to actually draw a sequence map to remember how they're going to tell it, they can actually trace the steps of going up the beanstalk into the house. They steal the chicken, they come back down. I'd have them put the chicken, draw the chicken next to the beanpole. They come back down the beanpole, they give the chicken to the mother, right? So then the chicken's in Jack's house. Then they go up again and they come into the castle. And the second time they steal the gold. They come back down alongside the beanstalk, put the gold in Jack's house. And I actually have them draw that out, because when they draw that out in their mind, then the sequence of how the story works is embedded in their mind. And I have found that works with students at very low IQ levels and students who you would think would never have a trouble remembering the sequence of the story, and then they can't because they get too balled up with some real beautiful descriptive word, and they forget where they are in the story. So it's just a way of them visually seeing in their mind what's happening in the story. And it also then, when they go to perform the story, if you let them go to that performance stage, then they really are embodying, once they've drawn that out and you've had them trace the story as they develop the sequence in their own mind, draw it out, then they actually draw that out for you as they're telling the story. So you can see them viscerally moving through the story, and they're sharing what they see with you. So they're seeing it, then they're telling you about it, which makes it a much more effective story than if they just tell you what they've written on a piece of paper. So that's one of the ways that I teach storytelling and creative writing in the classroom. And I have a lot of fun seeing what kids come up with and hearing the descriptions of the houses and their experience in the going into the hovercraft is always a big hit. Just let me say. They love joysticks in outer space, right? So.
Yeah.
Something happened to me when I went over to the hovercraft that has never happened to me before.
What was that?
I turned into a cartoon. I was cartoon-like. My hovercraft was cartoon. I became cartoon.
Wow.
It was very interesting. I sort of enjoyed it, being a cartoon. And I also wish you guys were here with me. I feed the squirrels all morning out on my deck, and now there are 6 of the most beautiful doves out there eating the leftover, the crumbs the squirrels have left. And I guess I've just never been here at this time of day to look out there. It's amazing.
Aww.
So Emily, did you have any feedback about that experience of being in the hovercraft and visualizing the setting?
Did I, when I was in that?
Yeah. Did you find that an interesting visceral experience?
I have to admit something. Your
Okay.
voice was very, very soothing to me, and it's been a very long day. So I admit that I may have been in a different kind of state of mind,
Sweet.
a little bit. I have to admit that. So I didn't get as much out of that as I think I could have, but I could feel I was definitely there with you. I can describe to you the hovercraft beautifully. I'm in there. But when you described being comfortably encased in a seat that would make me feel like I'm really nestled in and that I have a safety belt on, I completely followed you, and I followed you all the way into sleep. So I'm sorry.
You know what? Sometimes we think that we've completely let go and we haven't been doing that. But the beautiful thing about guided visualization is that somewhere in your creative mind, you absolutely saw it.
It was all.
And the
Yeah.
fact that you were so relaxed just is, you know, a lovely, clearly something you needed to have.
So I did not sit. I didn't sit down. In my hovercraft, it was I stood. So I still imagined that there was like an apparatus around me that I felt secure as we moved through space. But for whatever reason, it was like a standing control board, and I stood the whole time.
Love it. Well, it's great to let the student decide what the hovercraft is. And you know, in the classroom, obviously, you would probably be doing the character development one day, and then you would be doing the sequence map and the setting maps a different day, so that you would have more time to play with each of those, and also to let the kids share what they've seen, because that validates their creative thinking.
The other interesting that happened for me, which it'd be something to explore. I know our time is up, but
Yeah.
so my castle was very science fiction because I was in space. It wasn't like the traditional medieval type castle. It was like a metal structure of triangles and like folded metal kind of thing. Very sci-fi.
Nice. I don't think there, so I always tell the kids, and this is something that I think it's important to remember, in creative process, there is no right and there is no wrong. There are just interesting choices. And your really gifted mathematical science kids have issues with that because they want to know, did they do it right? Right? They're always so worried, did they do it right and are they going to get an A? And this is not about that. This is about exploring your own ability to see and to think things through. So I know we're right at our time, but I do want to say that this is something that kids can use in math. They can use it in science. They can use it in engineering, in architecture, in medicine. The ability to see within your own mind something beyond what you're currently looking at is going to be a huge life skill in our coming age. Creative thinking is, in a lot of the things that I'm reading, considered the #1 skill, because computers are going to take over so many other things. AI will just be running our lives, but the ability to see and to create and to visualize is a huge life skill. So I really encourage all of you to use it in your classrooms whenever you can. And it is very helpful to find beta music on the web and have that playing very gently in the background, because that's just another neural release. Goes back to the neuroscience, and it just helps them relax further. And then remember, anytime you're asking them to visualize, that you let them settle into it by finding that vagus nerve area and breathing into it and just giving them a few minutes to relax into it. And give them a starting place each time that they can build from. So I really appreciate your coming, and
Thank you.
loved working with you. Loved hearing about all the different pictures, and just seeing you and playing in story with you. And hope you got a lot out of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Donna
Thank
Marie, do you
Donna
do you
Marie.
do workshops? Would you be interested in coming in to do a workshop, say at my school at some point? I know it's not the ideal time to be coming anywhere, but doing it virtual, you know, is it something that you think we could do on Zoom with a big screen or something like that? Or
I think so.
okay.
Mm-hmm. If you were able to visualize in this Zoom meeting, I think that the kids probably could too.
Yeah, I think that they could.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Well, I'm grateful to have had this opportunity to meet you.
Thank
all
you.
of you. It's great. I hope I
Likewise.
see you
Nice to meet
again.
you, Emily.
Yes.
Very
Thank you,
much so.
Kathy. Nice to meet you, Sharon.
Yeah. And
Thank
Emily,
you.
do you know how to get in touch with me? Do you have my website address? Okay,
Yes.
awesome. Okay.
And Kathy, I loved hearing about your doves too.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was very, they're gone now, but they just sort of came and left.